Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 939B, and today's date is April 7th, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. Government is Strategically Positioning Military Assets in Syria and Iraq. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, yesterday we were discussing the Panama Papers, and Iceland's prime minister said he resigned, then he said he didn't resign. And we can see right now is all of this is being orchestrated to put pressure on each and every one of these countries to rile the people up, to maybe get certain leaders out of power, to make other countries look evil because they're not in line with the private Western central bank system. And we see out in Iceland, which threw a lot of the bankers into jail, that something very interesting happened there. It turns out that there was some conspiratorial speculation whether the explicit hit on the ex-prime minister was precisely due to Iceland's crackdown on the country's criminal bankers. As a reminder, Iceland is the only nation that sent bankers found guilty of crimes resulting from the financial crisis back in 2008 to prison. It turns out there may have been something valid in this because the Iceland Monitor reported that 3 bankers from the defunct Iceland Bank are to be released right now from jail after serving just 1 year of their 5-year sentence. Very interesting. Wikileaks is out there saying the U.S. government is behind the Panama leaks. And they're attacking Putin, they're attacking China, as we know. And many of the other countries, of course, they sprinkle in others into the mix to make it look really good and to put pressure on those leaders to fall in line and do whatever the U.S. wants and the central bankers want. Putin's out there saying he denounces it, and also it wasn't really implicating Putin, but his friend, and it seems they don't have that much on Putin at this point, but it doesn't really matter at this point. They're using it and putting these huge headlines up there, trying to convince everyone that it's Putin, it's Xi Jinping, it's everyone else but the U.S. government employees. Now, like I said in the other reports, they're going to be looking at this, and this is going to be used for many different agendas. Of course, one of them is to tax everyone and to push new laws into place. And we see the IMF, Christine Lagarde, we see Obama talking about a worldwide tax reform. Basically taxing everyone together. This is how we can solve this. We can bring the revenue into the IMF. We can bring the revenue into each one of these countries that have a private Western central bank. And we can knock down the debt. Now, of course, as we know, they're not going to be going after the elites, the very wealthy. They'll be coming after everyone else. Now, remember, they will sacrifice wealthy people who are not involved or wealthy, but not as wealthy as the powered elite. And they don't really care at this point because they believe they're on a different plane of existence. And we see right now that these Panama Papers are going after Assad in Syria. And if you notice and you look around, you see the direction of their agenda and where they're pushing it. So when we look at everything going on, we realize, yes, they threw in some U.S. companies, some wealthy people. This is to make it look good. But you have to remember the corporate media, they are the gatekeepers to all of this. And they're going to keep whatever they want out of it because we know that George Soros and other organizations are in control of all these corporate news media sites. And they're going to hold back certain information and release other information for their agenda. Now, this is part of their phase 1. To put a lot of pressure on all these countries, because as we know, as this system continually falls apart, they need to provoke war or have all these countries fall in line with the private West Central Bank system. Now we know that this is not going to happen. They're not going to have all these countries fall in line with the private Western central bank system. So their next phase is war. And they're going to continually push this as hard as they can. Now, we know the Dutch, they had their referendum and they voted no about the Ukraine-EU deal here. France and Germany is out there saying that we're going to continue to back the EU agreement with Ukraine. Poroshenko is out there, and he believes the Dutch referendum on the agreement between his country and the EU was an attack on the unity of Europe and an attack on the expansion of European values. Now, Poroshenko is out there, and he's recommending that the Dutch authorities ignore what the people say. Just look at the Ukraine-EU deal. It doesn't matter about the referendum. It doesn't matter what the people are saying. Just ignore it. Sounds like a dictator to me, because that's what a dictator would do. Ignore what the people say. Do whatever you want. And we're seeing a lot of this. And these are the countries that the United States are in line with. Actually, these are the countries where they help get these individuals elected, of course, using manipulation. These are the countries where they had coup d'etats, and we're noticing like Turkey, like Ukraine, and other countries, these leaders are turning into dictators. So what does that tell us about our leaders? Actually, they're not leaders at all. I wouldn't follow them, so they're not going to lead me around. So Ukraine and Turkey, they are getting closer together. We discussed this before, and they have launched Black Sea naval drills. And we can see right now they're cooperating because they want full control of the Black Sea. Why are they doing this? Well, they need control because when war breaks out, they need to make sure they are ready to go in this area, because who is in this area? That's right, Russia. And we can see right now they're doing all different type of exercises in the Black Sea. We see Turkey has a frigate there, and we see the Ukraine has their frigate. They have many different exercises going on. They have tactical maneuvering, cargo transfer, signal communication at night. So they are preparing and getting ready. Now, out in China, Russia will be delivering the S-400 missile system by the end of the year. And the Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System, that has a range of about 248 miles. And it is capable of tracking and destroying all existing aerial targets, including ballistic and cruise missiles. So China most likely will be putting this in the Pacific area, down by the South China Sea, because they realize that the United States and the other countries that are in line with the United States has encircled them. Now, this is a defensive weapon. It's not an offensive weapon. And we can see they're going to use it to defend themselves. Now, of course, they're also going to place this near North Korea, because as we know, the U.S. will be coming from that location. Now, out in the Armenia, Azerbaijan area, we see things are still heating up. The ceasefire is holding. There's shelling going back and forth. But Erdogan was out there saying something very interesting, saying that Russia has now sided with Armenia. Well, didn't Turkey the other day side with Azerbaijan? And we know that Russia has had a base in Armenia for quite a while. They just upgraded it. So this is not really news, but everyone is taking sides, because what they're doing right now is they're going to try to push a war. Erdogan also said Russia is taking sides just like they did in Ukraine and Syria. Because, they're Russia's the ones that started the war in Syria and Ukraine. No. In Ukraine, it was the United States. In Syria, it was the United States with Turkey and the other coalition forces. Russia had an alliance with Syria. They had their ships in Tartus. Assad invited Russia in to help out with the terrorist problem. Russia butts up against Ukraine. The Crimean people voted away from Ukraine at this point in time. The southeastern people wanted to do the same. The U.S. decided, hey, you can't do this if we have a coup d'etat. You have to do what we say. So they started an anti-terrorism force to go after those people who don't agree. So again, Erdogan is really not spewing the truth because, as we can see, he likes to cover up the truth, hide the truth, lie, steal, rob. He's a dictator. Now, back in March 15th, not the U.S., but Saudi Arabia, which is taking orders from the U.S., bombed a marketplace in Yemen. And they hit the marketplace. It was not a military target. 97 are dead, 25 were children. Now, of course, as we know, the U.S. is always out there saying, oh, Syria hit, a school and they killed children. But when Saudi Arabia does it, you notice how the U.S. is very, very quiet about it. So a human rights organization was looking into the matter, and they filed a report. And we come to find out that the bombs that Saudi Arabia used were U.S. made. They were the GBU-31 satellite-guided bomb, which consists of a U.S.-supplied Mk-84 2,000-pound bomb mated with a JDAM satellite guidance kit, which is also U.S.-supplied. So we see at this point that the U.S. was giving orders to Saudi Arabia, orchestrating what was going on in Yemen, and supplying them weapons. And Saudi Arabia hit a marketplace and killed a lot of innocent people. Now, this has been going on in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon, but they only use the propaganda when they're trying to attack another country. If they do it and nobody notices, they just stay quiet about it. So it's very interesting on how all this works. Now, of course, the corporate media is not going to come out there and say, hey, yeah, it was the U.S. We killed children and men and women and wiped out complete families. No, they're just going to gloss over it, pretend it didn't exist at all. Now, the U.S. is mulling ideas, the possibility of creating more outposts in Iraq, northern Iraq. Why? Because as we know, the U.S. government, the central bankers, the coalition forces, they are now establishing their new plans, and we can see they're moving strategic military assets all around this area. And they're getting ready for the next offensive in this area. Now we see that Turkey, the dictator Erdogan, anyone that opposes him or reveals his secrets, they are now labeled a terrorist. Erhan Erdem from Turkey's opposition Republic Party, who revealed that the Islamic State terrorists had obtained sarin gas through the Turkish territory, well, he has been classified as a terrorist now. And it's based on secret witness statements. And there's no documentary evidence. Soon, he's going to have people, and he's probably doing it already, taking people away in black hoods and just dragging them off and executing them. And again, the United States is in line with Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Ukraine and all these other countries where they put the puppet government in power. Now, Turkey, they don't want journalists talking or filming or reporting on what they're doing, so they started to fire upon journalists as they were having their military operation, firing on the Kurds into Syria, into northern Iraq. And journalists came under fire, and the journalists saying that Erdogan, his troops were firing at them on purpose because Erdogan didn't want the journalists to report on anything. This is why when something happens in Turkey, Erdogan goes right out and shuts down YouTube, shuts down Twitter, shuts down social media, so the news can't get out there. He blocks journalists from sending information. And again, it's a dictator. Now, John Kerry is out there, and he is calling on Iran to help end the wars in Yemen and Syria. Well, Iran did not start the wars in these areas. The United States did. The United States had Saudi Arabia come in and start bombing Yemen. Yemen didn't attack Saudi Arabia. Actually, Saudi Arabia came in and invaded a country and started a war. In Syria, the United States created this free Syrian army, paid them, had them go into Syria to remove Assad. So for this to stop, all the U.S. has to do is recall all their paid mercenaries and tell Saudi Arabia, stop bombing. And it will all come to an end. This is more propaganda making everyone believe that Iran has something to do with this. Now we see Turkey is continually firing into Syria. They have not stopped shelling whatsoever. And we're starting to see that the Pentagon Press Secretary Peter Cook, people are asking questions now about Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, the Islamic State. And he finally admitted that Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, they're really one and the same. Actually, all these terrorist groups, it's all the same thing. They're all paid mercenaries created by the CIA, MI6, Mossad, put into place in whatever country they need to be put into place to cause chaos, remove the elected government. And we're starting to see that people are saying, well, wait a minute, what is the difference here? And guess what? There is no difference. Even the moderate rebels, it's all part of the same system. Now we see the Islamic State, they have hit a power station near Damascus, and this is part of the U.S. strategy where they take out the infrastructure, they shut down power to push their operations in the area. We see that the Islamic State is using chemical weapons once again. They are using it in Aleppo, and as we know, Russia, the Syrian armed forces, have been pushing the Islamic State out of this area, and now they're resorting to any type of weapon they can get their hands on, and anything that will cause a huge amount of damage. Now they're hitting civilians with these chemical weapons. And we're seeing that 29 are extremely injured, and we're starting to see that they're becoming desperate at this point. And what's happening right now is the U.S. government central bankers, they're backed in a corner. The proxy army is being pushed out, and they're going to resort to any type of weaponry they can get their hands on. They don't care if they kill civilians, families, or anyone else in that area. It makes no difference whatsoever, as long as they can get Assad out of power. Now, the Islamic State is being hit by Russia and the Syrian armed forces, and as they lose ground, they need the Free Syrian Army or the U.S. forces, the coalition forces, to fill the void. And what we're seeing right now is that the Free Syrian Army, the moderate rebels, they're taking over the border checkpoints, and they have seized the main supply route to Turkey. Because remember, the ceasefire dictates that the Syrian government will not fire upon the moderate rebels. So if they say, oh no, this supply route right now, this area is now in control of the moderate rebels, guess what? That supply route is going to stay open. And we can see the U.S. government is doing this all throughout Syria at this point. Now the U.S. and Turkey, they have a plot to push the Islamic State east in Syria. So translation is they're going to try to move east and take control of many of the regions in that area. And as they tell the story that they're pushing the Islamic State out, what they're really doing is going to each one of these areas and capturing those areas, because they want the border of Turkey. They want the north area to the east. They want the entire area, and they want control of this area. And what we're seeing right now is a complete buildup. We see that the United States government, the central bankers, they are strategically bringing in military assets, bringing in special ops, taking the Islamic State out of the equation, replacing it with the Free Syrian Army where they need to, because they know they won't be fired upon. We see ground-to-surface missiles are being supplied to the moderate rebels, the Islamic State, and all the other terrorist groups, because they just switch back and forth. And they're planning for this next offensive. And we're going to continually see more bases in Iraq. We're going to see more troops in Syria. And this whole entire ceasefire is not going to forward. It's not going to go forward because if Assad does not step down of his own free will, and the people, and they have the election, and the people actually vote for him, the entire mission of the United States government, central bankers, the coalition forces, is flushed down the toilet. So they need to do this before there's any type of elections. They can't even let it go that far. They can't even let Syria and Russia push the Islamic State completely out of the country, because if they do this, what is the reason for the U.S. to be in there? There is no reason. Now, something happened in New York and New Jersey where there was some type of shooter drill, active shooter drill. Now, bystanders spotted a couple of suspicious men, moving around the New Jersey train station, taking photos of security cameras, and they notified the Port Authority cops. Now, they came with lights, sirens, and they rushed to the scene. Well, come to find out that when they approached these men, the whole thing was a drill. Now, was this interrupted? Was something else supposed to happen at this point? But there were people who spotted something suspicious and reported them, and they had to say, oh, yeah, it was a drill. But the Port Authority police, they didn't know anything about this. So this might have been a false flag that was interrupted, or they were having this drill, and this is being used for the next false flag. Because as we know, these false flags usually follow a drill, or there's a drill going on at the same exact time. So everything that we're seeing and everything that's going on, and as the economy continually collapses, we see that the U.S. government central bankers, they're coming to a point where they're going to have to give the thumbs up to this next event. And we're getting closer and closer to it. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.